Well, I am delighted to be here with Ron Silliman. Hi, Ron.
Hi.
How are you?
Old.
Okay. And Laynie Browne.
Hello.
Hi, Laynie.
Happy to be here.
And Rae Armantrout.
Hi.
And Rae, you get the prize today because you came the furthest to this conversation, which is to say from Seattle, Washington. And we're here at the Kelly Writers House. And we're talking about a few paragraphs, a few passages from Lyn Hejinian's really important essay, The Rejection of Closure. And so there's much we could say about the whole essay, but we've chosen to be as focused as we can. So I would invite us to rotate around just reading each paragraph. I'll start with the first paragraph, and then Ron and so forth will go around. And she begins by referring to My Life, which is her prose poem that accounts for each year of her life. At the time when she first did it, she was 37, or published it anyway, 37 years old. So there are 37 sections, so 37 sentences each. In My Life, the structural unit, grossly the paragraph, was meant to be mimetic of both a space and a time of thinking. In a somewhat different respect, time predetermines the form of Bernadette Mayer's Midwinter Day. The work begins when the clock is set running at dawn on December 22, 1978, and ends when the time allotted to the work runs out, late night of the same day. It's true, Mayer has said. I have always loved projects of all sorts, including, say, sorting leaves, and whatever projects turn out to be. And in poetry, I most especially love having time to be the structure, which always seems to me to save structure or form from itself, because then nothing really has to begin or end.
I think that explains her experiments list perfectly.
It does, Bernadette's, yeah.
Whether the form is dictated by temporal constraints or by other exoskeletal formal elements by a prior decision, for example, that the work will contain, say, X number of sentences, paragraphs, stanzas, stresses, or lines, etc., the work gives the impression that it begins and ends arbitrarily, and not because there is a necessary point of origin or terminus, a first or last moment. The implication, correct, is that the words and the ideas, thoughts, perceptions, etc., the materials, continue beyond the work. One has simply stopped because one has run out of units or minutes, and not because a conclusion has been reached, nor everything said.
The relation of form, or the constructive principle, to the materials of the work, to its themes, the conceptual mass, but also to the words themselves, is the initial problem for the, quote, open text, unquote, that one faces each writing anew. Can form make the primary chaos, the raw material, the unorganized impulse and information, the uncertainty, incompleteness, vastness, articulate without depriving it of its capacious vitality, its generative power? Can form go even further than that and actually generate that potency, opening uncertainty to curiosity, incompleteness to speculation, and turning vastness into plenitude? In my opinion, the answer is yes. That is, in fact, the function of form in art. Form is not a fixture, but an activity.
Language discovers what one might know, which in turn is always less than what language might say. We encounter some limitations of this relationship early as children. Anything with limits can be imagined, correctly or incorrectly, as an object by analogy with other objects, balls and rivers. Children objectify language when they render it their plaything. in jokes, puns, and riddles, or in glossolaliac chants and rhymes, they discover that words are not equal to the world, that a blur of displacement, a type of parallax, exists in the relation between things, events, ideas, objects, and the words for them, a displacement producing a gap.
Language is one of the principal forms our curiosity takes. It makes us restless. As Francis Ponge puts it, man is a curious body whose center of gravity is not in himself. Instead, that center of gravity seems to be located in language, by virtue of which we negotiate our mentalities and the world. Off balance, heavy at the mouth, we are pulled forward. I'm going to invite us all, starting with Rae, to say anything at all about the ideas that are in here. And I'll just say the obvious, that rereading Lyn's prose aloud is a marvel because she's such a fine prose writer. Theoretically sophisticated, humane, wonderful turn of certain aphorisms. It's really brilliant. Okay, Rae, what would you like to say as a start?
Well, I like all of this, but I really like the second half, I guess, of that third paragraph. Can form make the primary chaos, the raw material, the unorganized impulse and information, the uncertainty, incompleteness, vastness, articulate without depriving it of its capacious vitality, its generative form? Can form go even further than that and actually generate that potency, etc.? This was, of course, at the time that what Ron called the new sentence was happening, and Lyn and Ron were, I suppose, the mother and father of
the progenitors
of this kind of prose poem, if we can call it that, and I was and still am sort of jealous of being able to do this, because I never could really stick with a constraint. I have tried, but it doesn't last very long with me. But it sounds wonderful when Lyn talks about it. I mean, on the one hand, this inchoate vastness. Well, I'm aware of that when I write too. That there's. You cast your mind forward and into the world, and it's this buzzing, blazing mess of sensory input. And then what happens? And so I think Lyn puts the tension correctly between the vastness of the possible and the way to kind of contain it. At some point she says that anything that's bounded, anything that has edges, will seem like an object. And I'm not sure that she's making object good or bad there, but it seems more relevant that she's making it like a good thing. You want to create to articulate an object that you can grasp, even if you're grasping it out of this vagueness and vastness.
So before we turn to Laynie, can we explore the tension a little more? On one side, sorry, I'm going to reduce it a little bit,
okay.
But on one side, we've got form that results from a constraint that you follow rigorously. Mm-hmm. On the other side, we don't want it to compromise vitality and power, which we associate with, freely choosing words rather than being constrained. Did I get the balance right? And do you think, obviously, we admire Lyn Hejinian's writing. This is a meta statement about the writing she did, but the writing she did, such as My Life, we admire it as striking that balance, yes? And how so one can go one way or the other, super constraint, some of John Cage just leaves you feeling like he just did that with a machine, and some lyric poet who claims to be free in choosing everything leaves you dry, even though that poet thought he or she was being vital. So how do you feel about that tension?
Yeah, well, I think what makes it work is that the constraint is arbitrary. And because it's arbitrary, it doesn't dictate content. And therefore it's kind of the opposite of Levertov's organic form and Creeley's, right, where form is always an extension of content. Well, that's not true for Lyn. She's creating form out of, and Mayer and Ron are creating form that has nothing necessarily to do with, or nothing much to do with the words that are going to be written. I mean, it has, it had a little bit to do with it in that she wrote it when she was 37 and that, she had 37 sentences. But that's still, kind of an exoskeleton, as she puts it. Right. And she finds that freeing because, you can still say anything. It's not like directing the content.
Right. Thank you. Laynie, your thought on this?
So amazing. I want to start at the beginning and how she's talking about Bernadette Mayer's I have always loved projects of all sorts, including, say, sorting leaves or whatever projects turn out to be.
Is that like raking the leaves in the yard or sorting leaves of paper?
I think making something with leaves, like spreading them on a table and just kind of marveling at them.
Maybe she did that when she was a child. My granddaughters do that in the fall.
She did it as an adult also.
Okay. Of course.
Why not?
I do it.
Leaves are beautiful.
Yeah. So, but then it goes on to say something that's so radical and hard to understand. I most especially love having time to be the structure. Which always seems to me to save structure or form from itself, because then nothing really has to begin or end. And I find it so comforting, especially given that we've very recently lost Lyn and also fairly recently lost Bernadette. And there's something here about the ephemeral becoming something that doesn't begin and doesn't end and is ongoing, and it is not only dynamic, but it outlives. The implication is that the words and the ideas continue beyond the work.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, when I first saw Sorting Leaves, I thought of where we're going to find Walt Whitman after he's gone. The leaves of grass under your boot soles. And your reading of that in relation to the two of them being gone, but so present in our mode of creativity, speaks to that. It's almost Whitmanian. Ron Silliman, you have so many thoughts. Give us one.
I will do my very best. When I first heard that we were going to talk about this particular text or paragraphs from this particular
like about a half hour ago.
No, I actually had prior knowledge.
Oh, okay.
But my first thought was, well, it's an extremely interesting tension that's being drawn here, because Lyn is most famous for this work of 37 paragraphs of 37 sentences each, written in her 37th year. And that certainly could be interpreted as a form of closure. And Rae's works, if you, for example, the poems in Go Figure, her latest book, have this almost iron sense of completeness to them when you get done with, when you just can't imagine another word or another line beyond. I could say that about some of Laynie's work as well. And yet, when you read Lyn's entire essay, her sense of opened or closed is not about the number of sentences and the number of years.
Not at all, yes.
And it really is about the openness of the human behind the writing and the sense that the writing can go anywhere. And I mean, my favorite element in Rae's poems is that they are constantly surprising, and then when they come to an end, they couldn't possibly have gone anywhere else. And one has that sense, which one could call closure, but it's exactly the opposite of it. And I think Lyn, by writing this particular critical work, really attacks exactly that point, the impulse to push the deer off the road as the meaning behind every single sentence in a poem versus having the bird thrown over the marriage counselor's fence as an element that, among other things, suddenly brings in William Stafford pushing deer. So
you're making a reference that we'll probably need to explain in a footnote of the conversation, but I want to come back to it because that's part of ModPo, fundamentally part of ModPo, that argument. Mm-hmm. But it makes me think a couple things, and then I'm going to invite us to do a little game. It makes me think that the essay is pretty combative. The essay is really standing strongly against a kind of idea of poetry that she and you guys and others in the San Francisco Nexus and at other places, people of a certain generation were all coming to more or less at the same time. And she's really making a strong case. I would almost say it's certainly a cultural values case or a political case. And so when she gets to open text, she means it kind of the way Rae does when she, and again we'll do the footnote later, when she reacts to William Stafford and says, you know, that's a closed text. My response to your closed text, because it's pretty cruel, that text, is to create an open text that is partly open as a response to closed and partly in itself open. So what I'd like to do is invite us, all four of us, to play a game of defining or describing open text. So we've got open text, open poem. We've got open discussion. We've got an open relationship between writer and reader that she talks to in other parts of this essay. And then we have an open course. The ModPo, anyone can. So we've got open text, open poem, open discussion, open relationship of writer to reader, co-creation, and open course. So I wonder if we can focus on open text and help people understand what Rae might mean, of course, but what might Lyn mean by that. Who wants to start? You've got one? Okay.
All right. And I don't know if this is the kind of answer you have in mind, but we'll just see. For me, when I'm writing, what I want to do is to not know where I'm going at first and to be open to impulses and inputs from the world as I'm going along. Like, I actually did find a dead bird at my back porch, and I did scoop it up, to quote this poem, in a dustpan. I did not actually throw it over the marriage counselor's fence, but I did live next to a marriage counselor, and I did consider it, but I didn't actually do it. But I didn't know when I started. The poem did begin as a sort of response to that Stafford poem, but I didn't know then that I was going to find the dead bird. So, so part
so you were
of
open to the experience.
Yeah,
you knew you wanted to react.
Yeah, and I think for me, being just writing in sections, like I often do, allows me to run one idea and then stop and then look around and wait and see what else comes to me. And I think I sort of privilege, in fact, things that come to me unexpectedly, kind of gifts from the outside, and I want to be able to pull those in. So my poems are, at best anyway, open in that sense.
Wow, that's great. That's just a great start. You're talking about a compositional approach, in a way, to open text. I guess this is time for the footnotes. So Stafford wrote a poem that he always read, probably as an encore at his readings. Is it called Driving Through the Dark? Something Through the Dark?
Oh, what is his poem called?
And yours is The Yard.
Mine is Traveling. And his is Traveling too.
Through the Dark.
Traveling Through the Dark versus Traveling Through the Yard something like that.
So just to put a quick point on it, Stafford's poem, the speaker is driving at night and comes upon a doe, a mom who's pregnant, who's been grievously injured or maybe killed by a previous car. And so what Stafford decides to do is to try to keep others from having an accident. He's trying to save the lives of other drivers by getting out of his car and throwing the pregnant doe, who might or might not be dead, off the cliff. And it's done in frosty and iambics. Okay? And then Rae comes along and satirizes it. In fact, has a great iambic line in it as a satire of the iambic. And it talks, as Rae has just said, about being in the yard and having a bird and tossing the bird over the marriage counselor's fence is a great rejoinder with the sensibility of this, I think. Okay, open text.
I'm ready. So I don't have the exact sentences in my head that are in this amazing essay, but there's two words, maximally excited, which are from the essay, in which she's talking about is instead of trying to narrow down or condense the meaning of a poem or a word in relation to other words to a smaller and smaller limited idea, the words instead maximally excite each other to more and more associations. And because of this, the possible meanings are multiplied exponentially, and with each person coming to the open text, and every time they come to the open text, it's possible to read it in more and more ways. So when I think of an open text, I think of that that idea from the essay about moving kind of ever out in our reading, as opposed to trying to, solve an equation.
Close down the options.
Yeah.
I knew this was going to happen, to invite three eminent poets into the room and ask about open text. You're going to get comments about how one writes. So I'm happy with that. Ron, what do you want to do with this open text?
The very first thing I want to do is invoke painting. Because I think the phenomenon of putting any object next to another object in a still life is very much what happens when you put the marriage counselor's fence next to the dead seagull, or whatever in those terms, and we can see it in classical still lifes. Someone like Susan B. does it so that we see 3 or 4 different worlds in conjunction with one another in one of her canvases in those terms. And it reminds me of the fact that I keep, going back to the Bernadette's Leaves, what I characterize as a sentence farm. In fact, that's the title of the file on my computer of sentences I might be going to use. And I have been, because my archivist is screaming at me to do this, putting together a cardboard box I have of various notebooks that I keep with me. The Rodea block, I got the idea.
I have this to show the camera?
You can show the camera. Actually, I don't think there are any real sentences in this one yet.
None that you can read, because it looks like a...
it looks like I have...
It looks like it's a serial code of your car or something.
Right. It's... I have a serious tremor, and that has made it harder and harder. But
steak tacos, are you ordering?
It could be that I was at one point, and then later it turns into something in a poem. which happens actually a fair amount in those terms.
Talk
but
about
I
open text.
initially got the idea for carrying these little notebooks around from Lyn Hejinian, who had returned from a trip to Europe sometime in the 70s with the little orange Rodilla block notebooks. And they looked so cool. They had a little grid on them. And at that particular moment, there was only one place in the United States you could actually find them, which was a hardware store.
You have one.
No, that's
not the
a
same
different
kind,
one,
but
it's the same function.
Same idea.
But it was a hardware store in the East Village. And she told me exactly where to go get it. And the next time I was in New York, I was on my way for the hardware store, got thoroughly lost because the East Village is the only part of Manhattan that's not a grid, and was walking down the street when Joel Oppenheimer suddenly shows up going the other way. I've never met the man before, but he looks exactly like his photograph on book jackets. So I go up to him and I say, blah, 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 fan of yours, looking for this hardware store. And he knows exactly what I want and exactly where the hardware store is, and he directs me perfectly.
That is such a convergence. I want to say something about open with respect to your poetry.
Okay.
Okay. So about, I don't know when it was, when you were a Writers' House Fellow, but it's more than 10 years ago.
12 years.
12 years ago. I had the luxury, the great occasion, as a teacher, preparing my students to meet with you, of reading, you can't say one cannot say I've read all of Ron Silliman, that's enormous, but I read a lot of it. Mm-hmm. And to me, open for you, and this has to do with the notebooks, open for you is open to anything and everything that comes into your orbit or your field of view, and that is things, views, perspectives, phrases, objects. That's openness. And what it produces is a poem that's a whole lot like the world, in fact, a whole lot like the universe, one might say. I'm going to say something about closure. Since the three poets all talked about compositional techniques and things, about closure in an emotional, psychological sense, then I have another game for us. Okay. So closure, I mean, to me, the first time I heard closure was my therapist saying, you know, I think what you should seek is closure. This was about the breakup of my marriage, which I've now mentioned twice.
Yeah.
No, one was before we started filming, I think. Is that right?
No.
No, while we were filming.
Yep.
Oh, gosh.
You haven't found closure yet.
Clearly. So when I first read Lyn, I thought, oh, yes, we need to reject closure because it's too easy, right? I mean, let us say that the president you didn't want to be president becomes president, and somebody says, well, you really need to turn the page, sort the leaves, whatever. And I don't think closure is the right response. So psycho-emotionally, what Lyn is saying is closure is bullshit. It's bullshit. There is no closure. Why should we pretend that a poem of all the things in our lives, a poem which should be open to all possibilities and ongoing presence in the Steinian sense, why should that close out any option? It shouldn't. So it's quite an argument being made. What I'd like us to do is another round where we pick, because she's very brilliantly aphoristic. That's not quite the right word, but she has these little short sentences or thoughts. And I would love for each of us, and I'll start since I thought of one already to give you a chance, but find one of these brilliant little takes, quick takes. The one I want to say is not a sentence on itself, it's the beginning of a sentence. Language discovers what one might know. That is so Hejinian. Can you say Hejinian in a beautiful way? Because just as writing is an aid to memory, that is to say, if you really want to understand how your mind is working, write. And that is a fundamental concept in the language poetry movement. But really, in modern poetry, in order to figure out what we're thinking, find the language, and then knowledge comes from that. So it's reversing common sense. Love it. Who's got one?
I've got one.
Okay.
Form is not a fixture, but an activity.
Nice.
I love that. It's suggesting it's alive, it's dynamic, it's newly invented as it's being invented. It's process. It's not like a dead object, but
Perfect.
a living tool.
Perfect. Ray, you have one?
I had that one.
Oh, okay. Did you want to speak more about that or find another? Because we can turn to Ron. And
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll go after Ron.
Okay, it makes us restless.
Oh, Ron. I'm so glad you joined us.
Yeah.
Why did you pick that?
Well, partly because I was focusing on Francie Ponge, who you called Francis, and I had never heard him called Francis.
Okay, well, there's always a
before in
first.
my life.
Did I get Ponge right?
Ponge, yes, which
writer.
reminds me of Derrida's Silliman, which is all one word in Derrida. But it makes us restless. The idea that language is it's not something that leads us to a fixed meaning. It doesn't help us with closure in our marriage, our garden, or anything else. It, in fact, sort of does the opposite. It leads us in all these different directions.
That's great, Ron. Thank you. Ray?
I guess I have to go now. I also like that one a lot. So
Did he steal that from you too?
Yeah.
Oh
so,
my gosh, you guys are one mind, I think.
well, no, we're just looking for short sentences, and there aren't that many of them.
There aren't that many.
In truth be told. So the one I came to now is not that short, but it is one I like. They discover that words are not equal to the world, that a blur of displacement, a type of parallax, exists in the relation between things, events, ideas, objects, and the words for them, a displacement producing a gap.
Lovely.
I think that suggests a kind of freedom, too.
Yeah. I have a gap footnote, and then I will do one more round because we need to wrap up. Yeah, I'm going to skip that little anecdote. Oh, they do have a Ponge anecdote. Can I do a Ponge anecdote? He, in 1940, I guess it was, when the Germans came into Paris, he walked to southern France, where he had sent his family ahead, I believe. I might have this a little wrong. And he walked, he hiked, and he didn't have any books with him, didn't bring books because he left them in the Paris apartment. And when he got there, he realized, and he's going to have a lot of time on his hands now because he's in semi-occupied France. And so he said, well, you know, I have no books, so I am going to write a book that will be the kind of book I want to read because I have no books. And that's when he wrote the Pine Woods Notebook, which is just about pine trees.
Love it.
It's amazing. That's an amazing thing. Okay. All right. For one last round, since it's just an extraordinary thing to have people who knew Lyn as well as you did, to just, for anyone coming upon this video, it can't just be about the language of inquiry essays or about this famous essay. It's got to be more about Lyn Hejinian in general. So I'd invite each of you to reflect on what someone who's coming to Lyn who didn't know Lyn or is new to the work needs to know or should know or whatever. So, Ron?
For a few years, Lyn Hejinian was employed as a detective.
I didn't know that.
I didn't
You're
know
going to
that.
leave us with that?
Is that true?
Yeah.
I heard it too. I heard it from Lyn. I don't know if it was actually years, but she did have a job as an assistant to a detective.
Well, that is a Sillimanian thing. I invited you to give us a personal reflection of after all these years, and you tell us she was a detective.
She was. Mostly working on cases involving people who had been convicted of capital crimes for some attorneys who were, in fact, trying to overturn sentences.
Interesting. Laynie?
Wow. It's hard to have words to talk about how important Lyn has been and is to so many of us. What do I want to say? Well, as you mentioned, my life is the work that she's most known for, but I guess I would encourage people to read not only my life. I mean, it's a good opening book. It's a good entrance, perhaps, even though it's not her earliest work. But I just love all of her work. I absolutely love the new book of essays, allegorical. I'm in a blank on the title. What is it? It has allegorical in the title. The book
Moments,
allegorical moments, and the book of 1,000 eyes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Unbelievable.
That was a long time in coming, right? The Book of 1,000 Eyes.
Yeah. All of it. I mean, all of it. They're so prolific, and as we know, not just a poet and a prose writer, but a translator and a teacher and a publisher, and just such a generous, kind presence, just, yeah, remarkable in every way.
Rae?
She was really an adventurer of sorts. I mean, when she was a child, she says she read the accounts of explorers that they left behind. And when I think of all the different directions she took in her life, I mean, just the fact that she chose to learn Russian as an adult because she wanted to be involved with Russian poets. I don't know exactly how, I don't know all the details of how she learned it, but she certainly didn't grow up speaking it. So as an adult, she learned Russian, and she went to the Soviet Union, first by herself, and then, or maybe with Larry, and then with a group of poets. Ron was one of them. And then she continued going several times, sometimes on her own. And I mean, that is, when you think about it, something pretty bold to do, something like being a detective, something unusual. How many people would learn Russian and then go off to the Soviet Union to meet with dissident poets? They're pretty amazing. And so I was constantly inspired and amazed by Lyn, actually, more, I think, than most people I could think of. But the thing I want to say right now, just a short little anecdote, is that I actually watched the returns come in of the Bush-Gore election at her house because I was teaching up there. Briefly, I did a year of teaching at CCAC, and so I was there that night, and Lyn and Larry invited me over, and so we did our sad time, our grieving together around that.
That was, blissfully is the wrong word, but blissfully only a day and a half or 2 days immediately, and then it was a month.
Yeah.
But so
right.
That seems efficient compared to other things. Well, when I reread, they discover that words are not equal to the world. In the context of the way children play with language, words as playthings, it put me in mind of Lyn's temperament, her personality, her sweetness. It was easy for me to imagine her understanding how children objectify language and then discover that words, rather than naming things perfectly and allowing you to operate the world, create in you an awe that the world is a whole lot bigger than any kind of single word that we could use to describe it. And that's in itself a theory of language, a theory of parenting, a theory of being a member of a community. Rae, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
It's great to talk about Lyn.
Yeah. Laynie, thank you. And Ron.
Thank you.
A quick question, Ron. Is it too late in your career to sign up to be a detective?
I definitely.
Okay. All right, we'll end with that. Thank you all.